Okay, so our first group, we're using the Pythagorean Theorem. Pythagorean Theorem is what? That is 100% correct. Way to go, guys. So here we know that our C is our hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always what's directly across from your right angle. So here you have x squared equals, and then our two legs are both 8 squared plus 8 squared. 8 squared is 64 plus 64 equals x squared. 64 plus 64 is what value? 128 equals x squared. We're going to square root both sides because we want to find the value of x. Is 128 a perfect square? No, it is not. But what do we know? We know it factors into 2 and 64 because we had to add 64 up twice to get 128. So we know those values. And we know that 64 is a perfect square. What is it? 8 and 8. We circle what has a buddy. The 8 escapes. What doesn't have a buddy stays locked up. We have 8 square root of 2. Our next one goes on to, we have side lengths of 4, and we're looking for the hypotenuse again. So once again, we're using our Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. A squared is 4. B squared is 4. C squared is what we're trying to figure out. Or x in this case. I'll put it as an x because that's to stay consistent. Okay, x squared. We have 16 plus 16 equals x squared. We have 32 equals x squared. Okay, now that we have this, we want to find x. We're going to square root both sides. When I square root both sides, this becomes x, and this becomes the square root of 32. We can now branch that out. What are our factors of 32? Okay. What'd you say? 8 and 4? Okay, here we go to 4 and 2, 2 and 2. Here we go 2 and 2. Okay, we can circle what has buddies. I have 1 pair, 2 pairs. So 2 times 2. What doesn't have buddy stays locked up. You get 4 square root of 2. Okay, our next one, we're over here. And we end up with x squared. Again, we're looking for the hypotenuse. Remember, the hypotenuse is the C. It's always directly across from that right angle. When we do this, we get x squared equals 5 squared plus 5 squared. We have x squared equals 25 plus 25. X squared equals 50. Okay. Next step, we got to square root both sides. Square root both sides. When we square root, we now need a factor. 50. 50 goes to 2 and 25. 25 is a perfect square. How does it factor? 5 and 5. You circle what has a buddy. My 5s have buddies. What doesn't have a buddy stays locked up. That's my 2. Last one on this slide. We are looking for the value of x. X squared equals 3 squared plus 3 squared. What's 3 squared? 9 plus 9. It's going to be 18. Nice job. We're going to square root both sides. How does 18 factor? 9 and 2. 9 is a perfect square. 3 and 3. We end up with 3 square root of 2. Okay, what do we notice here? So on your triangle investigation, this is something you should notice. In this, what do we notice? You have 2 legs that are each 8. And then we have a hypotenuse of 8 times square root of 2, right? Over here, we have 2 side lengths that are 4. And then we have our hypotenuse as 4 root 2. Over here, we end up with side lengths of 5. Our hypotenuse is? Okay, and our last one, 3, and our hypotenuse is? How are those related? So each of them have, all the hypotenuses have a root 2, right? So it's our side length times a root 2. So if you go over here, you see that this is written a little weird. I will try to edit this so that it's in the right spot. I'll erase our x's. So here we have side length of x, side length of x. Then the hypotenuse is going to be our leg length times root 2. Here we have our next set. If you have to add them above, you can. I actually only have 6 more examples for us to do, so you can just put them in those same spots. So our first one here, we see that we have a leg length of 7, right? So on our last triangle, when we did that, ooh, that's rough. We'll call that 45 degrees. what we just found on the other side was x times root 2. So down here, you see that x value would be 7, which means that my x here, my hypotenuse value, has to be 7 times my square root 2. It is the leg times radical 2. It's going to be your hypotenuse. And your second one, what's your leg length? So you can just add to the top. I only have 6 more examples, even though it says 8. So you can just write them in the top 2 spots. Yep. Bless you. So our leg length in this is what? 15. And then we're going to multiply it by radical 2. So to get that hypotenuse, it's going to be your leg length times square root of 2. Do you guys want to venture a guess for number 3?
15.
Okay, so our next one, what's our leg length? 20. Multiply it by square root of 2, and you get your hypotenuse. And then our last one is a little bit more confusing. We see now we have the hypotenuse, and we have to go back to our leg. So we know 2 ways of doing this. Does anybody know what your leg length has to be?
18.
It's going to have to be 18 because we know that it's x times square root of 2. We could have also solved this using the Pythagorean Theorem. Would you guys like to see it that way?
No.
Okay. Jaden, do you have your hand up? Okay. Okay, so here we now have the hypotenuse. And we know that if it has a root 2 in it, we can take the root 2 off and that becomes the leg. But this one doesn't have a radical 2 in it, right? So the way we're going to solve this is by the Pythagorean Theorem. Well, for this to be a 45, 45, 90 triangle, it means our leg lengths have to be the same. So I can now say that we know that this is going to be an x. Over here we know this one's going to be an x. So our Pythagorean Theorem is what again? Excellent. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Remember, c is going to be the what's directly across from that right angle. It's the hypotenuse. So we end up with x squared plus x squared equals 50 squared. X squared plus x squared becomes 2x squared. 50 squared. I'm going to go over here and do my math. I end up with 0, 0, 2, 5. So 2,500. Okay, I need to isolate my x. Right now that 2 is involved with it, so we're going to divide out the 2. When I divide it by 2, what am I left with? Exactly right. Square root both sides. We now need to factor. How does this factor? So what goes into 1,250? 50 goes into it how many times? So if you're not sure, let's start lower. Let's go with 5. We're going to switch it to 25 times 50. This goes to 5 and 5. 50 goes to 5 and 10. 10 goes to 5 and 2. Okay, we're going to circle what has buddies. We have one 5 group. We have another 5 group. So we end up with 5 times 5. What doesn't have a buddy stays locked up. So x equals 25 square root of 2. Okay, and our last one, it's a similar setup. We know that we have 10 squared equals x squared plus x squared. We have 100 equals 2x squared. We're going to divide by 2. We end up with 50 equals x squared. We're going to square root both sides. We end up finding our factors of 50. What are our factors of 50?
10 and 5.
Okay, we circle what has buddies. Our 5s have buddies. We're left with 5. What doesn't have a buddy? 5 square root of 2.